welcome everyone. Today's webinar about the majestic fjords of Norway. And I have to tell you right from the get-go, I'm very excited about this program. I've been to Norway numerous times. I'll tell you a little bit about that and share some of my experiences. Yeah, this is really one of my favorite trips. So for those of you who have not participated in a webinar before, or perhaps not been to one of our events, just briefly talk about what Wheel and Anchor is all about. And really, Wheel and Anchor, I have a vision. I created this vision when we started this organization a little over a year ago to bring well-traveled, like-minded people together inside of a community that allows us to share experiences and share with me the kind of places that you'd like to go and the kind of experience, how you want to travel. And that is really our philosophy here. And so far, that's been resonating very well with all the people that I've met at our various events across Canada. The other part of it, our goal for you, the travelers, I mean, this is about you, the members, is two things. As I mentioned before, about being well-traveled. What does it mean to be well-traveled? It just doesn't mean having gone on vacation and sat on the beach in Jamaica. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're talking about travel that is experiential, that it's educational, that you really come back as an enriched person. That's the kind of travel that we want to foster here at Wheel and Anchor. And Well Connected is really a game about this notion of bringing like-minded people together. And, you know, the more travel people that you know, people who have been fortunate enough to experience a lot of the world, again, I think it also helps to broaden your horizons and create the inspiration to travel oneself and learn about all these other amazing places around the world. So those are our goals for you and as members of Wheel and Anchor. So we're very excited to have you as part of our community. Who's joining us on the webinar today? So myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gordon Drager. I am the founder of Wheel and Anchor, and I'm joined today by my colleague, my right-hand man, and who's providing our technical support today, Joel Curry, as well as Cassandra McKinnon. Those of you who have perhaps called us before will likely have spoken to Cassandra. She is a host of some of our programs, as well as our member services specialist, and who does a great job of looking after any questions and inquiries and getting you booked on any trips that you're interested in. Today, our plan is to really inspire you about what Norway is all about. And I've designed this tour a little bit differently than other tours. All of our tours are different, as some of you will know. But rather than, you know, sort of doing this conventional sightseeing by bus in the cities and so on. The whole program is going to be done using local public transportation. And Norway has such an amazing system of trains and buses and ferries, and the infrastructure is part of what fascinates me most about the country. We're also going to be dining largely in local restaurants, so maybe the occasional dinner in a hotel or a lunch, but for the most part, I like to get out and experience some of this amazing Norwegian cuisine, which has evolved so much in the last 25 years. Frankly, it's, we're going to have some local guides, but for the most part, certainly on the shore excursions during our voyage. But I've been to Norway so many times. I just look forward to sharing with you some of the most amazing places that I have seen on this journey. So that is what my plan is all about for you guys today. Let's talk a little bit about Norway in general. We don't tend to know a heck of a lot about Norway. You hear about it from time to time. Mostly it's about oil and gas and about how they have such a massive sovereign wealth fund. But Norway has this massive long coastline that is over 100,000 kilometers long. So, I mean, you think about that's, far greater than the coastline of our British Columbia, for example. It's absolutely huge. And the other interesting thing about Norway is that it is bisected by the Arctic Circle. And if you can see the faint dotted line on the map there, fully half of our journey on this voyage is north of the Arctic Circle. So if you compare that to what that would equate to in Canada, well, nobody goes up there. I mean, yet, as I say, half of our journey is up there. It also is important to note because it means that in the polar summer, which lasts from about early to mid-May until late July, you have the midnight sun. It doesn't set. So we'll get a bit of a sense of that when we reach the northernmost parts of our journey, of what it's like to have sunshine all day long, or at least to have the sun not go below the horizon. It's an amazing, amazing experience. So let's look at a map of our program now. I'll just give you a bit of an overview of where we're going to be going. We're going to be flying into Oslo, which is, of course, the capital of Norway, and spending the first few nights before taking one of the most incredible rail journeys that I know of, all across the country, up to high in the mountains. And then enjoying the so-called Norway in a Nutshell program, which is one of the most famous tours in the country, if not all of Scandinavia, before joining our ship in Bergen and doing a round-trip voyage all the way up to the very roof of Norway and back before heading home. So that is the overview of our program, and without further ado, I'll sort of launch right in and give you a little bit of a sense of what we're going to see on each day of the program. So we're going to head out from Canada on the 30th of April. And you can, of course, fly from pretty much any city in Canada. We can provide the airfare, and I'll explain about that at the end. And then the next day, probably in the early afternoon, you will arrive in Oslo. And so I would imagine, because we have folks going to be joining us from different parts of Canada, we'll probably have arrival times, as I say, all over the afternoon, but I'll be meeting everybody individually in the airport. And then we'll get our first taste of this amazing Norwegian infrastructure by hopping on the Flytoget, which is their airport express train. It goes 280 kilometers an hour and zips us from the airport, which is almost 60 kilometers outside of town, and brings us right into the middle of Oslo. Our hotel is situated adjacent to the railway station, so it's perfectly located. We saunter off the train, we check into our hotel, and we can experience a lot of the city on foot. Oslo itself, it's a truly beautiful city. It's a small city. It's only 500,000 people. In fact, it's the smallest capital city on the European mainland. I mean, Norway as a whole only has about 4 million people. It's very pedestrian friendly. It's very bicycle friendly. And so it's the perfect thing that first day when we arrive. You'll have ample time to just wander around. And, this is one of my philosophies, is we don't need to launch right into tours and have a lot of stressful program. Oslo is a perfect place to just meander around and take it all in on your own before we start the formal part of our program on day 3. And again, the way that I've done this is a bit differently. We're going to be using a thing called the Oslo Pass, which is a city card. And it enables us to visit well over 30 of the sites in the city. It's something you couldn't possibly do in the 2 full days that we have there. But we get to use the public transportation system. It's subway, trams, buses. It's all fantastic, super clean, and a great way to get around this compact little city. We will have a local Norwegian for the first part of the day on our first day, who's going to show us some of the highlights of the city, like this opera house, which is actually also literally steps from our hotel. It was built since the last time I was in Norway, and it's this super modern structure that just melts right into the fjord. I'm very much looking forward to seeing this among all my other favorite sites. We'll probably head over to Aker Brygge, which is the retail and residential place on the harbor, beautifully designed. We'll go over to the Royal Palace. I have such fond memories of wandering around the different parts of Norway. So we'll spend a part of the day with a guide. You'll have lots of time on your own to take in some of these sites. And then the following day, we have a full day at leisure. And again, I did this on purpose because of feedback from members. There's so many things to see. And so many different things that people might want to do. So, for example, I imagine going up to the Holmenkollen ski jump, which was this very modern, as you can see, structure that was built right on a hill with a spectacular view overlooking the city. I've stood on the very top of that ski jump many a time, despite my minor degree of vertigo. But it is really an incredible place to be. But others might want to go, for example, they have an island across from the city center where they have 3 different museums, among them the Viking Ship Museum, which is just it's the most the best preserved collection of Viking ships that you'll find anywhere in the world. And it's all part of our Oslo Pass. So you can really choose and do whatever it is you want to do, and I'll point you in the right direction. And listen, the other great thing about Norway is that everybody speaks English. I mean, they learn it from kindergarten all the way up. So, language is never a problem. You can ask anyone. They're super friendly. It's such an ezy city to enjoy on your own. So we'll have 2 full days in Oslo, and I think it warrants it. As I say, I really, really love the city. We'll have some special meals there as well. But then when we depart On day 5, we're going to be heading overland to Bergen, the second largest city. And this day is always one that I can remember vividly, because we hop on the train again at the railway station that's just adjacent to our hotel, and we will send our baggage on separately, so you don't have to worry about hauling your suitcase. And we will go on quite an adventure. The train meanders through the suburbs and so on of Oslo and heads up into the mountains. And if you could imagine what the type of mountains, the type of environment that Nordic skiing would take place in cross-country skiing, that is exactly the landscape that you find as you make your way up into the mountains of Norway. Just these vast, rounded over mountains and valleys. It's just, the landscape is truly amazing. We'll head all the way up. We'll be on the train for a good 4 hours. The scenery is pretty breathtaking, every moment of it. We'll disembark high up in the mountains at a little village called Myrdal, where we'll then embark on the FLAM railway. And the FLAM railway is always referred to as one of the top 10 railway journeys in the top 10 railway journeys in the world. It is the steepest non-cogwheel train in the world. So it wanders on about a 20-kilometer stretch of track from way up in the mountains all the way down, passing these majestic waterfalls to the mouth of the SOGNEFJORD, or an arm of the SOGNEFJORD. And here we get to spend some time to have a snack for lunch. And then we continue our journey by ferry out the SOGNEFJORD and continuing on to the NORWEGIAN. And then we get on this amazing bus ride and then rejoin the train before we end up in Bergen. So it's a full day trip. But I tell you, it will leave you spellbound. It's an amazing, amazing journey. So that will be the whole day, and we'll have a little bit of a dinner in Bergen before the next day. We'll have the beginning of almost 2 full days in Bergen. And here again, we will be using the Bergen card, which is the equivalent of the Oslo pass. So once again, it entitles us to unlimited use of the public transportation system while we're there, as well as all kinds of sites, including one of my favorites, going up the funicular up Mount Fløyen, where you get a beautiful view like the one you can see here in the photo, overlooking Bergen and the Bergen Fjord. And the other benefit to having 2 full days in Bergen is a coastal city. So it's kind of like living in Vancouver. It rains even in May, which is part of the reason I chose May, because it's the driest month of the year. But on the coast, as those of you out in BC will know, that doesn't mean much, because it can and likely will rain. And so by having 2 days, if we do end up with 1 day of rain or projected rain, we can always go and visit, for example, the Edvard Grieg Museum, which the famous composer who composed Peer Gynt opera, and I've been there several times. It's quite a fascinating museum. The second day again will be also fully at leisure. I'll be sort of seeing who wants to do what. We'll probably also visit the Hanseatic Wharf, and certainly the fish market in the downtown part, for all the fishermen bringing their wares. So Bergen, once again, a myriad of things to do. And that evening is when we will then embark on our ship, the MS Richard Witt, as they say in Norwegian. And the Richard Witt is one of a fleet of Hurtigruten ships. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Hurtigruten. And I actually have a lot of knowledge about this, because I used to work for a company that was the Canadian sales office for Hurtigruten. So as a result, I have a lot of experience. I've been on this vessel many times. I've dealt with this company for a long, long time. And this Hurtigruten is the original coastal steamer route that has been plying the waters since for about 125 years. In fact, they just celebrated 125 years of going between Bergen in the south, where we are, up to Kirkenes in the north. It's been going on the same route all that time, and it is the lifeline for Norway because of this very rugged coastline that they have. Traveling overland takes an awful lot of time, and so the Hurtigruten was the solution to that. These ships travel every single day of the year, so they have, at any given time, a fleet of 11 ships in operation, so it departs on the same schedule every single day. So it's kind of like a bus service for them. But it's a lot more than that in recent years. Certainly in the last 20 years, it's really just developed, and they build themselves as the most beautiful voyage in the world. And I certainly could hardly disagree, and I've been on quite a few voyages. The ship itself is not a pure cruise ship. So again, some of you may be familiar with this. It is a hybrid between a cruise ship, in other words, where you have foreign tourists on board, but it's also a local form of transportation. You could meet a group of school children who are literally on their way to school, or a bunch of workers that are commuting to one of the towns from which they go out and service their oil platforms. And so there's all kinds of activity. You're constantly meeting people, and cargo is being loaded and unloaded in each and every one of the 34 ports. It's really, there's a lot of happening on board. The other thing I want to mention, why I've chosen this date and this ship, is that this ship is one of the newest ones that's been refurbished. They went through a massive refurbishment. She was built back in 1993, but late last year, late 2018, they gave it the new look. And so you get a sense of it here from the photos, everything very contemporary Scandinavian. They've made a total open concept kitchen in the dining room with, of course, all the floor to ceiling windows surrounded by it. It's really quite amazing. They've got hot tubs on board now. They've got a bigger sauna. They've got really all the facilities to maximize your experience as we go through this amazing coastline of Norway. So that's the Richard With, and we'll be on board her for the next 11 nights. And so we'll board her in the evening, and in overnight we'll travel up the fjords, and in sometime around late morning on the next day we'll arrive at Ålesund. And Ålesund is an Art Nouveau town. And it is one of my favorite in the country. Here you get this picture I actually took several years ago of Ålesund. She sits on an archipelago of islands, and it was built in the Art Nouveau style. So you walk around the streets of Ålesund and you really get a sense of that. In fact, it was designated as the Art Nouveau City of Europe just a few years back. Ålesund, like all of the other 34 ports, here's the thing. You can get on and off at any one port. So some of them are smaller villages. The ship may only dock for 15 minutes, or it may dock for an hour or two. Or actually in some places like Trondheim, it can dock for up to 4 or 5 hours. So depending on how big the port is, there's always the opportunity to go out either on one of the excursions offered on the trip that are either included in our program, or they have a whole myriad of other things that you can do. I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go through the itinerary. So leaving Ålesund, we head further north, and then we head into Trondheim. Trondheim is the third largest city in Norway. Very colorful. You get a sense of the wharf area here. It's a university town. This first visit to Trondheim, we will have at leisure. So we'll probably take a wander around into this very area, because I find it's just so photogenic that you get, see it from all angles, and the cameras are always snapping. But there are a number of other optional activities one can do if anybody's really into biking. Rent a bike for a couple of hours, and you can experience the world's only bicycle lift. You drive your bike onto this little sort of moving sidewalk that brings you up the hill. Very, very, very cool stuff that we'll find in Trondheim. From Trondheim, our journey continues still further north. We cross the Arctic Circle. Each time we cross it, both northbound and southbound, we do a little ceremony. You get a certificate that says you crossed on a ship over the Arctic Circle, which of course is 66 2/3 degrees north. And then we hit in the late afternoon the Lofoten Islands. And this is truly nature pure. I mean, every single view that you get through this area is an absolute postcard. And this is another important point, because as I mentioned at the outset, we will be doing this voyage in a round trip. So we're going to go all the way up to the north, and we're going to visit the same 34 ports on the way back. So a lot of people ask me the question, why would you do that? Why would you visit the same ports twice? Well, here's the thing. The ship is going all day and all night. So the ports that you hit at nighttime on the way north are the same ones that you'll hit in the south in the daytime on the way south. So if you look at this area in the Lofoten Islands, we'll arrive in the north, heading into the sunset into the evening. So even though there'll be a little glimmer of light because we're up above the Arctic Circle and it is early May, we're going to be frankly sleeping for a lot of the trip through this on the way north. But not to worry, because we'll be seeing it on the way south. The Lofoten Islands, when you approach them from Stamsund, from the mainland, it just looks like this wall coming out of the sea. It's one of the most amazing things to approach and particularly when you have the sun setting in the background. When you arrive in, this is really the home of the Vikings. And in fact, when we arrive in Svolvær, this first trip we will have an included trip to visit a Viking, a huge Viking hall and a dining area. So you get a real sense of how the Vikings actually lived. It's a terrific tour. They serve you a meal on iron plates, and and they have the guys walking around with the whole Viking outfit on. It's not cheesy. It's really amazing. But as I say, nothing takes away from the scenery. The scenery in this area, all these little red houses sort of stuck out of the rocks, with a backdrop that is just, as I say, right out of a picture postcard book. So this is the Lofoten Islands. As I say, we'll get a chance to do the first part of it on the way north, and then we'll experience them in all their glory when we come back south. Heading into the next day, we're going to be going still further north, and we'll stop at some smaller ports before arriving in Tromso, which is the largest city in northern Norway. And frankly, it's one of the largest cities in all of the Arctic regions, period. It's quite a large town. It's a university town. A lot of polar studies are done here. It's also the gateway point to the even further Arctic Norway, to the so-called Svalbard Peninsula, which is another several hundred kilometers up into the Arctic. There's many things to do here in Tromso. I think just walking around the town is a great way to experience it. But they offer kayaking, or you can take a zip across cable car ride that goes up the mountain and offers the view, which is basically the one you see here. So Tromso, truly a great city. So then the next day and evening, we'll be crossing the 71st degree north latitude. So that will become the furthest point north of our trip, the North Cape. You think about where that is in Canada. 71 degrees north latitude is like the northern end of Baffin Island. And what amazing to you is the fact that you still see communities. Not here directly on the North Cape, but you'll see people even farming up at this latitude. It's quite remarkable that the Gulf Stream, which keeps the coast of Norway warm and ice-free all year round, the ship travels all year round, to service this coast. So the North Cape, we'll have an excursion here to this dramatic headland, where there's an amazing interpretive museum, and you learn a lot. And one of the things that I remember learning there was a lot about the World War II history. There are so many sunken ships. There were so many battles fought between the Allies and the Germans, and all these sunken ships in the waters in and around the North Cape. You never would have thought that. Why would they have gone all the way up there? But nevertheless, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about this particular region. From the North Cape, we then actually head south. So we're heading down from the 71st degree latitude and quite far east, and we'll end up in Kirkenes. Kirkenes is the end point of the Hurtigruten trip. It's the turnaround point for the ship. It's also right where Norway meets Russia. And so what we're going to do when we arrive in Kirkenes, we're going to take a trip out to the Russian border, where we are going to learn a little bit about the history of the relationship between Russia and Norway. And so it's a very interesting tour. We can't actually cross the border, even though there's, just like the border between Canada and the US, there's no fence. There's just a post saying Norway, Russia. However, you are sternly warned, don't try to cross because you don't have a visa, and they don't take it lightly. So all in all, an interesting day. And so, as I say, at that point, the ship turns around and we start to head back. And all of those wonderful sights that we missed because we were asleep at night, we're now going to get to enjoy because they're going to be during the day. And so we're going to head back, arriving the following day back in Tromso. This time we're going to not get into Tromso until quite late at night, around 11:30 p.m. And so we have a great excursion here planned and included in the program, which is that cathedral that you see, that very modern pyramid-shaped, triangular-shaped structure. It's an incredible place. We're going to head in there, and they do this amazing midnight concert that will just make your skin how shall I say, it sends shivers up your spine is what I'm trying to say. They do a combination between, you know, like organ music and local, like just, and the sound, the acoustics in this place just blow me away. So I'm really excited to do that. We have to stay up a little bit late at night, but trust me, it will be well worth it. We're then going to overnight the next day and head back down into the Lofoten Islands. As I said, we will have missed the whole northern part of the islands at night, unless you decided to stay up all night. But we'll see them in the day on the way back. And one of the highlights of the trip so far is the so-called TROMSO. The TROMSO is this very, very narrow, the picture doesn't even do it justice, because I swear to God, you think you could reach off the ship and touch the sides. And the ship will sail into this narrow fjord, and then they, courtesy of their bow thrusters and stern thrusters and thrusters everywhere, the ship does literally a 360-degree turn, because there ain't room for more, and goes out. And then there's also something special that happens, but you have to take the trip. I can't tell you what that's all about. So again, after heading out of the Lofoten Islands, which we'll get to enjoy all day long, we then get down further into the so-called Seven Sisters area, where we'll pass by a mountain called Torgaten, which is this giant mountain with a hole right in the center of it. I think there may even be an excursion where you can actually climb up to this massive hole. I know I've been up there myself, and it's quite a view. But while there are excursions offered on this day, like on every day, I think these is one of the days where simply sailing by is the best thing that you can possibly do, and take in, you know, like these Seven Sisters, which are these mountains that were reputedly trolls that were turned into stone. We head further south again, coming back into Trondheim. This time, the excursion is part of our program, and where we're going to go is to visit the Nidaros Cathedral. And I didn't get a photo in here of it, but the Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim is this giant, amazing cathedral. We thankfully don't see too many of them on this trip. This is not an ABC tour, but the cathedral has these very ominous looking gargoyles adorning the whole outside of it. And it's one of those things you look up and you think they're staring at you. So it's quite a sight. And that will be the highlight of our trip. I was going to say the Nidaros Cathedral is actually the shrine of, it's sort of Norway's landmark, if you will. It appears on coins, on banknotes. It's that significant of a church. Later on in the afternoon, our ship will sail down to Kristiansund, and here there's an excursion that I would recommend. We don't include it in because some people, you know, it's a hard to balance. Do I just stay on the ship and enjoy it, or do I go over here and drive along this Atlantic road, which is really testament to the infrastructure building they've done in Norway. They've got bridges and tunnels. I mean, hardly anybody lives up here. And I always find it ironic in Canada, we make a big deal about building our bridges and tunnels, and yet the Norwegians seem to have them everywhere. So this is one of the most popular actually tourist attractions in Norway, is to drive along this section of roadway that jumps from island to island. It's really quite amazing. We continue to head further south, and we make our final leg back to Bergen. And this time we're going to pass through the mouth of the SOGNEFJORD. So if you remember on the way north, we will have passed it at night, because we leave Bergen at about 9:30 p.m. at night. But there's an amazing archipelago of islands that form the outlet of the longest fjord, not just in Norway, but it's actually the world's longest fjord. It stretches inland by some 270 kilometers, if my memory serves me correct. And we'll, of course, have sailed, when we did the FLAM railway, we'll have done part of the part farther inland of the SOGNEFJORD. And so now we'll get to sail by it as we make our way towards Bergen, where we'll have to say goodbye to our ship, the Richard With, and we'll have one final night there. We'll go for a nice dinner, reflect back on our journey, and get one nice sampling of Norwegian food, and before we fly back home or continue our journey to elsewhere in Scandinavia. So that wraps up our program. And if you have any questions in the meantime, I'll have questions in a second, but I'll just take you through now what the details of this program. So we've done this a little bit differently this time. So we've separated out, so often the programs that we've offered so far, we've always done including the air built right into the price. But when I took a very tough look at the pricing on all of this, I realized that we weren't really going to be super competitive by putting the airfare into the price. So we've separated it out between the land and the cruise and the air. And the pricing shown here is based on a double inside cabin or a single inside cabin, starting at $68.80, of course, in Canadian dollars. And that is for all of the land and cruise portion that I've just described. And so talking about the airfare for just a moment, again, when I looked at the prices, if you book this trip early enough, you can fly into Oslo and back from Bergen from pretty much anywhere in Canada, and the prices are around the $1,000 mark or even less. The way that our contract works with Air Canada, I was not able to have a better price to justify putting it in. So I thought, no, we're going to leave it out. Plus, we've also had a lot of people that like to fly on Iceland Air. And so when you fly on Iceland Air, you get a free stopover, not like the hotel is free, but you get to stop over for a few days in Iceland without any additional airfare costs. So it's one of those things I do suggest that you consider, is to flying in on Iceland Air and enjoying a little bit of that country on the way. What's included in the program, as I mentioned, of course, all of the transportation. We're going to be using local transportation, trains, buses, ships, ferries, you name it. We've got a total of 6 nights in 4-star hotels with breakfast. We've got a handful of lunches and dinners that are included. While we're not on the ship, of course, on the ship, we have 3 meals a day. We've got the Oslo Pass and the Bergen card. And once again, with the shore excursions, they offer something like 50 different excursions. Everything from active excursions like hiking and kayaking and cycling to more traditional excursions, to going with Zodiac boats, to see bird calling, all kinds of different things. I picked out the best 6, or the ones that people always come back and say, we're so glad we did those excursions, and we've included those in the program. In addition, we have a shipboard credit of 1,300 Norwegian kroner that enables you then to choose some other excursions, or if you don't want to do any other ones, you can use that for your onboard beverages or whatever. So I think it's a nice flexible way. We'll do 6 of them together, and the other ones you can choose, and I can certainly give advice on which ones are the best ones to choose from. And of course, as always, taxes, gratuities, and services of your host, yours truly in this case, are also in the program. What's excluded? Really only the insurance, of course, any few other meals that we have while in Oslo and Bergen that I left out of the program because, listen, part of the experience is in Bergen, for example, going down and grabbing a salmon sandwich at the fish market. And so that's not the type of thing that you can sort of build into a program. It's better you experience that on your own, and you sort of choose some of the fresh fish that comes out. Of course, if you have any questions, we're about to get into the question and answer section of the program. So I would encourage you now to start to scroll down to that chat button and ask me all the questions that you want. I see a few questions that have already come in. But of course, if you have questions later on, or if you are watching this webinar after the fact, just give us a call, drop us an email, either Cassandra or myself, and we'll be more than happy to answer all your questions about this program, about Norway in general. So let's start to go on to the questions that we have so far. First of all, first question comes from Peter. How big are the cabins? Good question, Peter. So the cabins on this ship, this is not like a cruise ship. Or river cruise ship. This is, again, when it comes to the cabins, it's more like the ferry in the sense that their average size is a little bit smaller. Your standard cabins, inside, outside cabins, are in and around 110, 120 square feet. So they're cozy, but I tell you, they are so beautifully, sometimes I know it sounds cheesy, they're like IKEA cabins. There's a shelf, there's a drawer, there's something for everything. So you can move into this cabin, put all your stuff away, and you feel like there's, that there's a place for everything. So they're very, very well designed. Then another question asked about how much are the drinks on board? Okay, so you might have heard Norway is expensive, and it's largely because they're an oil country, and so therefore the value of their currency makes the prices quite high in Canadian dollars. So the drinks are relatively expensive. But then again, if you compare them Canadian prices, I would say they're modestly more than in Canada. Wine is fairly expensive, starting around 50, 60 Canadian dollars for a bottle. So one should be aware of that. If you know, what we'd sometimes done is gone to the local liquor store and grabbed the bottle and brought it on board the ship so we can have a little tipple before or after dinner. So there's always ways to sort of get around that. Another question is if the trip goes back to back with the trip to the Orkney and the Hebrides. So that's our Scotland by Sea tour. Yes, in fact, it does. It's funny, a number of members have asked that question. Our Scotland by Sea program commences 2 days after the end of this program. I did that on purpose, first of all, because I'm hosting both. So I did it to be convenient for myself. And I also did think that there were people that perhaps were interested in going on board both programs. So you can go on this program and fly from Bergen then to Dublin to join the Scotland by Sea program. Is May the best time to go? Yeah, May is the best time to go, in my opinion. I've done this trip in April, May, June, September, October even. May is, as I said, the driest month of the year. It is not high summer, which means that it might be a little bit less busy. It's certainly a little bit cooler than it would be in July or August. But it's, I just find you don't have the throngs of tourists everywhere in May. I think you have the better weather. So it's been our experience that May is, in fact, the best time to go. Let's see, I've got one more question here about, let me see, what's this question? I've got one more question about, is there entertainment on board the ship? Not really. So this ship, their tagline is, the entertainment is the world that passes you by. And I think that's very much true. They do have sometimes some local musicians that will come on board, or a pianist in the piano bar. But there isn't a program like you'd find on another cruise ship. That's not part of the program. What is the currency? Norway uses its own currency. It's not part of the euro. It's not even part of the euro region, as you may well know. So they use the Norwegian kroner. It's about 5 kroner to the Canadian dollar. And what about prices for lunches and dinner when we are in Oslo and Bergen? As I said, it's on the relatively, here's the interesting thing about that. My experience of Oslo and Bergen. If you go for a Big Mac meal, I don't eat Big Mac meals, but if you do, a Big Mac meal in Oslo will run you close to $20. So that's a bit of a shocker inside. But if you go to one of my favorite restaurants, in fact, we're probably going to go there, and you order a 4-course chef's menu at a essentially gourmet restaurant for all intents and purposes, it'll run you about $80. So that, frankly, is at least as much as, or almost as much as you're going to pay in Canada for an exquisite meal. So at the low and moderate end, it's expensive. At the a little bit higher end, if you're willing to splurge a little bit, it's actually quite okay in Norway. Let's see. Good. That appears to be all the questions. Sorry. One more just popped in. What's the food like on board the ship? I just saw one more question pop in. The food on board the ship. This is one thing that I'm glad the question was asked. We get 3 meals a day, so it's not like a cruise ship. You don't have buffets every 5 minutes. And the Hurtigruten has done an amazing job in the last 10 years of transforming their onboard experience. Because I got to tell you, when I first sailed on this ship 20 years ago, the food was mediocre. But they have now transformed their kitchen. They brought on top-notch chefs, and they have created what they call the Norwegian Coastal Kitchen, which is essentially the Norwegian version of farm to table. So they literally pick up supplies at all the different ports, and you get fresh seafood. You also get fresh lamb and beef and the vegetables. It's really quite amazing. So the food has undergone an incredible transformation, and there's ample. You have buffets at both breakfast and lunch, and then at dinner time, it's a set dinner time. So there's 2 time slots, and you have a fixed 3 or 4 course menu. So that's how the food works. Good. I think that's all the questions for this evening. This has been I think this has been a great webinar just because I love Norway, and I would love to answer any more of your questions about this program. You'll note that the brochure was not out yet. We literally just got it off the press, as they said, this evening. So I'm just going to go through one last look at it. And everybody that was signed up for the webinar today, we're going to email you a copy of our newest brochure about this program, and you'll be able to look through the itinerary in even greater detail than I've mentioned just now. And of course, if you have questions, let us know. And thank you for joining us this evening for the majestic fjords of Norway. We'd love to have you on board this trip. We're probably going to limit it to around 20 people. Just so I would suggest, if you're interested, let me know sooner than later. And I look forward to catching up with you all in the next webinar or at one of our upcoming events. So I'm signing off from here in tropical Thailand. Have a nice day.